There's something about long, empty roads at night that makes them feel wrong. It's not the darkness itself, we grow used to that. It's not the silence, either silence can be comforting. It's the way the headlights carve out a tunnel of light, and yet, beyond it, the world seems to dissolve into nothing. It's the way every shadow feels like it's watching you. And the way, if you stare long enough into the void, sometimes the void stares back. Ask anyone who's driven a lonely stretch of asphalt after midnight, and they'll tell you the same thing. The road has a life of its own. It's where ordinary logic begins to fray, where people vanish without a trace, where things appear that shouldn't exist and disappear before you can question them. On the night of April 18th, 2021, Mitch Kuhn was just another man behind the wheel. He had spent the day at a racing event and was heading home, towing a heavy toy hauler along the Hume Highway in Bardia, Australia. It was around 7:40 p.m. The sun had long since slipped behind the horizon. The highway stretched ahead, a thin, glowing ribbon beneath his headlights. And then, without warning, something stepped into that ribbon. At first, Mitch thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The figure was small, barely human-sized, wearing a blue parka. It wasn't running, wasn't panicking. It was just standing there, like it had materialized out of the night itself. And in those few seconds, Mitch's heart nearly stopped because he realized what he was looking at. A child, standing dead center in the middle of a 6-lane highway. There was no time to stop, no room to swerve. The toy hauler behind him made braking impossible without risking a fatal jackknife. All he could do was pray and keep driving. The trailer screamed as he pulled the wheel slightly, missing the figure by inches. Mitch's mother, sitting beside him, grabbed her phone and called the police immediately. Patrols were dispatched. Officers promised they'd sweep the area. And for a moment, Mitch felt a flicker of hope. But as the night dragged on, unease began to gnaw at him. What was a child doing on a deserted highway miles from the nearest town? Was he lost? Was someone looking for him? Or worse, was something else happening out there? Unable to shake the image from his mind, Mitch called the police again. This time, he even offered them the dashcam footage he'd captured. And that's when things got stranger. An officer told him they'd already found a boy matching the description and returned him safely home. Relief washed over Mitch. He posted online later that night, writing that the whole thing had left him sick to his stomach, but at least the child was safe. Except, he wasn't. Days later, the New South Wales police issued an official statement. They hadn't found anyone. No child, no evidence, nothing. They'd scoured the area for 8 hours until nearly 4 a.m. and come up empty-handed. So, what did Mitch see? Maybe the dispatcher had been misinformed. Maybe the boy's parents had found him first. Maybe, and this thought chilled Mitch more than any other, maybe someone else had gotten to him before the police did. Kidnapped. Snatched from the roadside in the dead of night. Or maybe there was never a child at all. The highway where Mitch swore he saw that figure remains quiet today. And the footage, though grainy and inconclusive, still shows something standing in the middle of the road. Something shaped like a small human. Something that shouldn't have been there. That's how these stories always start. Not with monsters leaping from the shadows. Not with ghosts clawing at your door. But with something small. Something that almost makes sense. A figure on the road. A shadow moving where it shouldn't. A glimpse of something you can't explain, and a feeling that follows you long after you've driven past it. Because the truth is, the road remembers. It remembers every accident, every scream, every desperate breath that's ever echoed against the asphalt. And sometimes on nights, when the moon hides behind the clouds and the darkness stretches on forever, it gives those memories shape. What you're about to hear are real accounts. Some are tragic, some are inexplicable, and some are terrifying because they could happen to anyone, to me, to you, to anyone who's ever found themselves alone behind the wheel at night. But all of them have one thing in common. They happened on roads that should have been empty. They happened when logic said nothing should have been there. And they leave behind a question that still lingers in the rearview mirror long after the engine stops. What else is waiting out there, in the dark? Mitch's story wasn't an isolated one. The deeper you dig into what happens on these forgotten roads, the more you realize that encounters like his, eerie, inexplicable, terrifying, are woven into the fabric of the night itself. Sometimes they begin as nothing more than a silhouette in the headlights. Other times they crawl straight out of the darkness and into your path, like what happened to a young woman named Molly Perales on a quiet road in Michigan. It was May 8th, 2021. Molly, known online as Pissed Pasta, was driving home from a night out with friends. It was late, around 2:30 inches the morning, the hour when reality begins to bend and the world feels thinner somehow. The road they were on, Packard Drive Northeast, ran alongside the Rogue River, silent, deserted, nothing but trees and black water on either side. And then, someone screamed from the back seat, "Stop! Stop! What the hell is that?" At first, Mally thought it was a deer, or maybe a fallen tree branch. But as the headlights swept forward, the shape moved. It was low to the ground, crawling, and then, slowly, it lifted itself upright. It was a woman. She was soaked, drenched from head to toe, and stumbling forward on her hands and knees as if she had just escaped something. Her hair clung to her face, and her lips were pale from the cold. The temperature that night hovered around 48 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill someone if they were exposed for too long. Molly's friends panicked. Some screamed to keep driving. Others said to go back. Against her better judgment, she turned the car around. Curiosity, or maybe something deeper, a kind of primal concern, forced her back to the spot. When they returned, the woman was still there, but now she was sitting upright, pounding her fists against her own head and sobbing uncontrollably. "She's crying," someone whispered. "What do we do?" They circled once more, debating whether to get out and help. There was another possibility they couldn't ignore, a darker one. What if this was a trap? What if someone was hiding in the trees, waiting for them to step out? So instead, they did the only thing that made sense. They dialed 911. By the time police and paramedics arrived, the woman had collapsed. She was still alive, still breathing, but she was barely conscious. They rushed her to a nearby hospital. Hours later, when Mally returned to the spot, she saw that the pavement was still wet from the water dripping off her clothes. But something else caught her eye. Deep gouges in the dirt near the roadside. It looked like claw marks, like someone had dragged themselves out of the river. The police followed the trail and found a car parked near a house on the other side of the riverbank. The woman, they concluded, had fallen into the Rogue River and swum across. It was a miracle she had survived. But the story didn't end there. Neighbors reported seeing her earlier that evening, wandering the area, acting strangely. One man said she had walked straight into his home, yelling "hello," before leaving without explanation. Another saw her pacing backyards, muttering to herself. A few days later, the woman, now identified as May, recovered enough to speak. She was 28 years old, a student from Kalamazoo, a city more than 60 miles away. But she had no memory of how she had ended up in Belmont. None. Before her disappearance, she had told friends she believed someone was following her. She felt watched, stalked. And while investigators found no evidence to support that claim, it was enough to send her spiraling into a mental breakdown. Psychologists call it a dissociative fugue. It's rare, but it happens. A person under extreme stress can suddenly lose their sense of identity and wander far from home, sometimes for days or weeks, before regaining awareness. When they wake up, it's as if they've been living another life. That's likely what happened to May. Her mind broke under the weight of paranoia. She drove until the roads ran out. She stumbled into a river, and when the freezing water shocked her body back into awareness, she crawled out, confused, terrified, and utterly lost. She was lucky. If Mally and her friends had driven past without stopping, May might not have made it through the night. But the road doesn't always let people walk away. Sometimes it gives them nightmares that chase them long after they're safe. Sometimes it delivers something worse, something that isn't confused or lost, but malicious. That's what a family in Sheffield, England, discovered one October night in 2016. It was just after midnight when they left the Drawbridge pub and began the drive home. The streets were empty. just a string of orange streetlights and the steady hum of the engine. But as they turned onto Grange Mill Lane, a figure stepped out from behind the trees and into their path. It was a clown, not the colorful, smiling kind. This one wore a tattered costume and a rubber mask stretched too tightly across its face. It waved at them, slowly, deliberately, and then started to walk toward the car. The driver's instincts screamed go, but reversing meant turning their back. Before they could decide, the clown broke into a sprint. They threw the car into reverse and backed away, tires screeching against the pavement. The clown followed, running full tilt after them, arms flailing. At first, they thought it was a prank, but just 3 days earlier, another man had been slashed by someone dressed the same way a knife-wielding clown who left his victim permanently disabled. Since then, the country had been gripped by a wave of copycats. People in clown masks chasing strangers, banging on car windows, trying to force their way inside. Now, one of them was chasing their car. The driver slammed the accelerator. The clown dove out of the way at the last second. If he hadn't, he would have been crushed beneath the wheels. They didn't stop. They didn't look back. And they never found out who he was. But that's the thing about the road at night. You don't always get answers. Sometimes all you get is the image of a figure sprinting toward your headlights, burned into your mind long after the darkness swallows them whole. The clown incident wasn't an isolated scare. It was part of a pattern, one that's older, darker, and far more unsettling than a masked prankster in the dark. Because once you've spent enough nights on the road, you realize it's not just strangers that appear where they shouldn't. Sometimes it's the broken, the desperate, and the dangerously unhinged who wander into the beam of your headlights. It was just past midnight on June 2nd, 2018, when an officer from the Fowler Police Department in Texas was driving back to the station after a long shift. He'd driven that stretch of road hundreds of times before a straight, unremarkable strip of asphalt cutting through the outskirts of town. But this night was different. The car in front of him suddenly swerved into the next lane, jerking violently away from something on the ground. The officer braked, confused, and then he saw it. There, lying motionless across the road, was the body of a young woman. Her blue shirt was torn and dirty. Her arms were splayed unnaturally at her sides. She wasn't moving. The officer's stomach turned cold. It looked like a crime scene, like someone had dumped a body and left it to be found. He approached slowly, one hand hovering near his weapon. The woman didn't stir, but then, as a shadow fell across her, she blinked. Not only was she alive, she was conscious enough to stand up and stumble to her feet. Slurred words tumbled from her mouth, incoherent and confused. Later tests revealed why. Her blood alcohol level was nearly 3 times the legal limit. She had crashed her car into a ditch just minutes earlier, wandered onto the road in a daze, and simply laid down. The concussion from the crash, mixed with the heavy intoxication, had short-circuited her instincts. She wasn't trying to die. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't even aware of what she was doing. It was pure chance and the vigilance of the driver ahead that kept her from becoming another statistic. Had that car not swerved, she would have been dead before the officer even saw her. Drunk, disoriented, unconscious. The road doesn't care. It will take anyone who steps onto it at the wrong moment. But sometimes, what's waiting there isn't lost or helpless. Sometimes it's deliberate, and sometimes it's hunting. On the night of February 26th, 1946, Jimmy Hollis and his girlfriend Mary Jean were parked on a quiet stretch of road outside Texarkana, Texas. They'd gone to see a movie and had pulled over to spend a few extra minutes together before heading home. The night was still, the woods on either side, silent and black, and then, from the tree line, something moved. A man emerged, tall, lean, his face hidden beneath a white pillowcase with 2 crudely cut eye holes. At first, Jimmy thought it was a prank. Then the stranger raised a gun. "I don't want to kill you, fella," he said. "Just do what I say." Jimmy stepped out of the car, hands raised. The man swung the butt of his weapon and smashed it into Jimmy's skull. The blow knocked him unconscious instantly. Mary screamed and bolted into the woods, but the man was faster. He caught up to her and struck her too. Before he could do more, headlights appeared in the distance, and the masked figure vanished into the night. Both Jimmy and Mary survived. Jimmy's skull was fractured in several places, but he lived to describe the man who attacked them. Tall, slender, calm, no fingerprints, no tracks, no trace. Investigators suspected the couple knew their attacker and were covering for him. They were wrong. Less than a month later, another couple was found shot to death in their car on a secluded road. A single .32 caliber cartridge was recovered at the scene. 3 weeks later, a third couple met the same fate, same weapon, same MO. The press dubbed him the Phantom of Texarkana, and for months, he terrorized the city's lovers' lanes and back roads. People stopped driving at night. Couples avoided secluded roads. And even with the FBI involved, the Phantom remained a ghost appearing from nowhere, striking without warning, and vanishing into the darkness. Eventually, investigators traced a series of stolen vehicles to a man named Ewell Swinney, a repeat car thief whose height and build matched Jimmy and Mary's description. During his arrest, Swinney blurted out, "I know what you're really here for," but there was no physical evidence linking him to the murders. He was sentenced to life in prison for theft, but he denied being the Phantom until his death in 1994. To this day, the case remains unsolved. The Phantom's identity died with him or with someone else entirely, but in Texarkana, people still talk about the man in the pillowcase mask. They still remember how the roads grew quiet that year, how everyone stopped driving after dark, because sometimes the road doesn't just carry people from one place to another. Sometimes it becomes a hunting ground. Fast forward to January 8th, 2024, nearly 80 years later, and a truck driver in Western Australia found himself on another dark highway, miles from the nearest town. It was close to 11 p.m., and the world around him was empty, or so he thought. Then, something flickered in the distance. Two shapes, illuminated briefly by the beam of his headlights. They were dragging something across the road. At first, he thought it was an animal carcass, but as he drew closer, the shapes resolved into two human figures, bent low, straining under the weight of something large and heavy. They didn't look up. They didn't react. They just kept dragging. The driver swerved violently, narrowly missing them, and slammed on his brakes. But when he turned back to look, they were gone, vanished. Whatever they had been hauling had vanished too. Dashcam footage later revealed something chilling what looked like human legs, pale and motionless, hanging from whatever the pair was carrying. Shorts, black shoes, human, or at least human-shaped. Police never found them. No body was recovered. No crime was reported in the area. The question remains, who were they? And what were they dragging across that empty stretch of highway? The road doesn't answer. It never does. It just swallows the truth whole and leaves you staring into the dark, wondering what you almost drove into and whether it saw you too. By now, you've probably noticed a pattern. These stories, though, they're scattered across decades and continents, all share the same unsettling heartbeat: a lonely road, a sudden, inexplicable encounter, and a lingering question that never really goes away. But sometimes, what happens out there isn't wrapped in mystery at all. Sometimes, it's raw, ugly, human nature stripped of reason, boiling over into madness that makes the road dangerous. And sometimes, that madness comes straight for you. It was a cool September night in 2018 when a New York Uber driver accepted what seemed like a routine ride on Long Island. The streets were mostly empty, the hum of the tires against the asphalt, the only sound breaking the silence. His passengers were chatting quietly in the back seat. Everything felt normal, and then, without warning, a car blew past them on the left, so close it nearly clipped their bumper. The Uber driver barely had time to react before the other car slammed on its brakes and stopped dead, blocking both lanes of traffic. The sudden jolt threw everyone forward in their seats, and before the driver could even process what was happening, the other car's door flew open. A man stumbled out, angry, wild-eyed, His fists were already clenched. He stormed up to the Uber, screaming, pounding his fists against the windows. "Get out of the car!" he shouted. "You blew the light! Get out!" The Uber driver's heart raced. This wasn't a simple road rage argument. The man's movements were erratic, his speech slurred. There was a real chance he was armed. His passengers, 2 young women, were terrified. One of them whispered, "Drive. Just go." And that's exactly what he did. The driver threw the car into reverse, backed up as quickly as he could, then turned sharply and took a side street. The man ran back to his own car and followed. Headlights appeared in the mirror, closer and closer with each turn. The Uber driver tried another route. The man followed again. It wasn't random anymore. This was a chase. Street lights blurred past. Red lights loomed ahead, forcing the Uber to slow down. If he stopped, the man would catch them. If he ran the light, he'd risk a crash. It was a no-win situation. And then, by some miracle, flashing red and blue lights appeared in the distance. A police cruiser was parked at the intersection just ahead. The Uber driver honked and waved frantically as he pulled up beside the cruiser. The officer stepped out. The other driver, too drunk to think clearly, tried to speed past, but was quickly pulled over. He was arrested for driving under the influence, but what he might have done if he'd caught up, no one knows. The Uber driver later admitted that, in the moment, he truly believed he was going to die. And that's the terrifying thing about these encounters. Sometimes the danger isn't supernatural. Sometimes it's just human, unpredictable, unhinged, and seconds away from exploding. The road has a way of amplifying what's already lurking inside people. It strips away the distractions, the crowds, the noise, the sense of safety that comes with daylight, and leaves you face to face with whatever's in front of you. Sometimes it's a ghost story you can't explain. Sometimes it's a predator. And sometimes it's a mistake that almost becomes a tragedy. Even in the modern era of surveillance cameras, GPS trackers, and endless traffic, roads at night remain one of the few places where people disappear and where the world briefly slips out of its predictable orbit. It's a place where a woman in a dissociative fugue state can crawl out of a freezing river miles from home, where a childlike figure can appear on an empty highway and vanish without a trace, where 2 people might drag a human-sized shape into the darkness, leaving behind no evidence but a question that haunts every driver who sees it. And it's a place where, sometimes, the road itself feels alive, as though it's watching, waiting, feeding on the moments when fear blooms in your chest and you realize that help is miles away. But if there's one thing all of these stories have in common, it's this. They change the way you look at the road forever. You stop assuming that the darkness ahead is empty. You start scanning the edges of your headlights for movement. And every time you pass a stretch of forest or an abandoned field, part of you wonders what might be standing just out of sight. Because the truth is, most of these encounters never make the news. Most of them never even get reported. They're passed down as warnings whispered among truckers, told around campfires, posted to online forums by people desperate to convince themselves they aren't crazy. "I saw something," they write. "Something I can't explain. A figure too pale to be human. A pair of eyes staring back from the shoulder of the road. A body that wasn't there a second ago." And sometimes, they're not even sure if what they saw was real or if the darkness simply played tricks on their mind. But the stories keep coming. They always do. Because every night, someone is driving alone down a forgotten stretch of highway. Every night, someone looks up from the glow of their dashboard and sees something they weren't meant to see. And every night, the road takes another memory, another encounter, and adds it to its collection. So, the next time you find yourself driving home after midnight, windows down, radio low, the hum of the tires lulling you into a sense of calm, remember this. Not all roads are empty. Not all shadows are tricks of the light. And not everything that steps out in front of your headlights wants to be seen. The night hides more than you think. And if you ever doubt that, ask the people who've been there. Ask the ones who've watched something crawl out of the dark, stare straight into their windshield, and vanish without a sound. Because they'll all tell you the same thing. It's not the silence that gets you. It's not even the darkness. It's the feeling deep in your chest, cold as the asphalt beneath your wheels, that you are not alone on that road. If there's one thing these stories prove, it's that the road is far more than just a strip of asphalt. It's a mirror one that reflects everything we fear most about the world around us. And if you stare into that mirror long enough, it starts to stare back. Sometimes it reflects the inexplicable, like a child standing alone in the middle of a highway, then vanishing without a trace. Sometimes it shows us the broken woman crawling from a freezing river with no memory of who she is or how she got there. And sometimes it shows us the worst of ourselves, rage boiling over into violence, cruelty hiding behind masks, darkness lurking behind the wheel. But the strangest thing? None of these encounters happen in the places we expect. They don't happen in haunted houses or abandoned hospitals or graveyards shrouded in fog. They happen on the same roads we drive every single day. The same roads where we sing along to the radio, call friends on the phone, and watch the streetlights flicker by. That's what makes them so unsettling, the ordinariness of it all. You could be heading home from work, tired but content, and see something standing on the shoulder that shouldn't be there. You could be laughing with friends and, out of nowhere, find yourself face to face with someone who means you harm. And you might think that if it happened to you, you'd know what to do, that you'd be brave, logical, unshaken. But ask anyone who's lived through it, and they'll tell you the truth. In that moment, logic doesn't matter. Your world shrinks to the space between you and whatever's staring back from the dark. The truth is, we don't really know what's out there. Most of the world's roads are still empty when the sun goes down miles of open land, forests that stretch endlessly on either side, and shadows that swallow everything they touch. And inside those shadows, people have seen things they can't explain. Some of those things have names. Some are written off as accidents or coincidences, and some remain mysteries that will never be solved. But if you're ever alone on a road like that, if the night feels heavier than usual, if the air seems colder than it should be, if you catch something moving just beyond the reach of your headlights, remember this: you're not the first person to feel that way, and you won't be the last. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's someone who needs help, or maybe, just maybe, it's something that's been waiting there all along, watching every car that passes, wondering which one will stop. Because the road doesn't forget, it collects stories, it buries secrets, and sometimes, when the conditions are just right, it lets those secrets crawl back out into the open for just long enough to remind us that we're not as safe or as alone as we think. So the next time you're driving home late, with nothing but the hum of your tires and the glow of your headlights to keep you company, keep your eyes on the darkness, because the darkness is watching you too. And if you ever see something step out from the shoulder and into your path, something that shouldn't be there, don't ask what it is. Just ask yourself one thing: will you keep driving, or will you stop?